Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update tonight, the 29th of December 2012. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Tropical Cyclone Mitchell, which developed off the Western Australian coastline. We'll then talk about Tropical Cyclone Freda, which developed near the Solomon Islands. We're then going to talk about a new tropical low that could pose a potential threat to areas in the week to 2 week period, but it should start to show signs of formation sometime within the next week. And the winner of Cyclone Mitchell's Facebook poll question. We asked you a question on Facebook. We had over 450 respondents, and tonight we picked the winner of that. They get a $50 Elite Sports and Supplements voucher from our major sponsor, as well as a free documentary download from us of Tropical Cyclone Lure. So we'll announce that towards the end of our broadcast. Thanks very much for watching tonight, and let's get into it. Okay, first things first, people, we're going to talk about Mitchell. Mitchell at 2:24 PM Western Standard Time, which is around about 4:30 PM Queensland time, was a Category 1 system located near 17.9 south, 110.3 east, about 600 kilometres northwest of Exmouth, 760 kilometres west-northwest of Karratha, and was moving south-southwest at a reasonable rate at 17 kilometres an hour. They will issue another update at 9 PM Western Australian time. At this stage, not posing a threat to any landmass of Western Australia. So if we take a look at the bomb's expected track of this system, we're looking at a general south-southwest movement, a little bit of intensification here overnight tonight, and then weakening as it starts to encounter not so much wind shear but cooler waters, and a little bit of drier air coming in from the west is going to weaken this system in the longer term and eventually wash it out to the west of, or well west, when I mean well west of Geraldton, or between Geraldton and Carnarvon. The latest update from the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre basically has a beeline directly south-southwest of this entire system. They too also have it just developing a little bit more over the overnight hours to a 50-knot system, which is almost Category 2, or maybe just on Category 2 on the Australian scale, and then have it fairly weakening fairly gradually after that as it encounters those cooler waters, a little bit of drier air. Pretty well, what the JTWC says is very similar to what the bomb says. The guidance here is very good from the modelling, high confidence in the forecast track, and basically we're looking at it weakening quite rapidly once it tracks south of 20 south due to cooler sea surface temperatures of 24 to 26 degrees Celsius. Tropical cyclones require temperatures above 26 degrees Celsius to continue to maintain their energy. After 48 hours it's expected to dissipate. The remnants of it may go back onto the west coast, but it really won't be anything more than a shower or two. And really not much wind in it at all to note. If we look at this system on water vapor imagery, we can see clear spiral banding here, and the center of the system being right in that region there. Don't pay any attention to that track, it's a little bit off at the moment, but that's the center of our system there. So we've got pretty good convection developing right over the center of it. So definitely a tropical cyclone. And as we look at the ASCAT pass, which lets us know what the winds are doing at the surface. From earlier this afternoon, we see fairly good little symmetrical area right underneath this region, remembering that the cyclone has probably moved a little bit to the southwest since that image was taken, but you could see here 30 to 40 knots right into the center part, or right into the eye wall of the system. Right in there. So definitely a tropical cyclone, pretty symmetrical looking thing too in terms of its inner structure. Its outer structure, though, we can see that there's good strong winds down to the south of it, but very little in terms of wind strength to its north, and that's quite common when we get tropical cyclones that form not along a monsoon trough. They just form independent of it. We tend to get these sort of systems where they're very heavy to their south in terms of wind and rain, and they don't really do much to their north. Looking at the moisture levels around this system, and we can see here that there's a fair bit of moisture right through this region. So the cyclone's not in any danger of entraining or getting dry air wrapped around its circulation. Now, cyclones detest and cannot survive in dry air. Now, if we head a little bit to the southwest, though, we can see this blue stuff. This blue stuff suggests fairly dry air with less than 25 millimeters of air as we go through the atmosphere's levels. And so if that dry air starts to wrap around into the system, that will also help to weaken it. Now, the system's going to move towards the south-southwest through this period, and you can see that as it does that, it is likely to encounter some of this drier air in a couple of days' time. Not quite yet, but once it does encounter that dry air, as well as the cooler sea surface temperatures, the writing is really on the wall, and it will be on the wall very quickly. The other thing that we've got to try and look at is wind shear, and wind shear at the moment, the system being here, is a little bit south of the upper anticyclone, and conditions start to deteriorate for it as it travels further to the south-southwest or southwest. So it's under fairly good conditions. 10 knots of wind shear, which is this line here, is very good. 20 knots of wind shear is survivable. Once it starts getting into this between 20 and 30 line, it'll start to weaken pretty rapidly, and then anything more than that will just completely destroy its internal structure. So at the moment, the cyclone's in fairly decent conditions. To really intensify rapidly, it would probably need to be right under that upper anticyclone. That upper anticyclone's a couple of 100 kilometers to the north-northeast of the actual center of the system. So that's not going to assist it that much. What it does do is it does allow the convection to escape at the top. You can see this little arrow here, providing a little bit of an outflow channel for the convection at the top, which keeps allowing new thunderstorms to grow. But as I say, once it starts to cross that 20 line, we're looking at a fairly stunted or muted chance of any further development of this system. The final thing we're looking at here is the 26-degree temperatures of the ocean. So we can see here we've got good ocean sea surface temperatures all through into the just west of the Pilbara, at least all the way down to about 21 degrees south. Any further south than that, and the temperatures, these blue temperatures here, are under 26 degrees, the cyclone will not survive in them. So the cyclone will die once it crosses this into this area here. So at the moment, remembering that it's still in very good sea surface temperature area, so it's still in 27, 28 degrees sea surface temperatures. It's still got a little bit of way to go before sea surface temperatures actually impact the system. Alright, without confusing you too much, these white arrows here show us the direction that the atmospheric winds are going to try to push this particular tropical cyclone, and we can see that the arrows here are suggesting a south to then southwest movement of this particular system, and not really trying to pull it back in towards the coast. They're trying to sort of just push it a little bit further away this entire time, probably a little bit more westerly out here. But the steering winds aren't very strong. They're quite strong near the system here, so they're going to push it at about 20 to 30 kilometers an hour here. But once the system gets a little bit further south, it may even slow down a little bit, because these other numbers here, this 10 with the orange line, suggest that the wind speeds there are only about 10 knots. So there's not a really strong pushing regime in the winds, in the atmospheric winds. So the system will travel towards the south or south-southwest or even southwest, but not really be pulled back in towards the coast. If the system weakens completely into just a bit of a surface circulation, a couple of showers, it may decide to push back towards the coast, but it won't be doing that as a tropical cyclone. And once again, just to show you the dynamical model guidance, once again keeping the west coast of Australia free and clear. So no chance of this thing actually hitting the west coast. It's going to push harmlessly down towards the south or southwest, and then eventually weaken out. Once, remember, it crosses that area of lower sea surface temperatures around about here where my arrow is, it should start to weaken pretty rapidly from there. And as I say, if there are a couple of showers remaining in a surface circulation, it may just decide to push this way, but it certainly won't do that with any gusto, with any wind, or any real rain to speak of. Okay, that's where we'll leave Mitchell, and we'll start talking about Freda. Now, Freda is actually in the Australian area of responsibility. This is the 160 line. It lies west of that, and therefore the Bureau of Meteorology will be letting us know a little bit more information about Freda through their updates, as well as the Fiji Met Bureau keeping an eye on it as it decides to head back towards the south-southeast east of 160 eventually. But at the moment we can see it's just west of that. It's Category 2. The bomb expected to intensify to a Category 3 severe tropical cyclone. But we can also see one of the things we talked about in last night's update, or this morning by the time it uploaded, was the fact that this northwestern area of the system doesn't pack a very large gale radius, and we'll look at that very shortly. A general southerly movement is what the models are tipping, but there's a fair error margin in whether it's going to be a southwesterly or south-southwesterly movement, whether it's going to be a due south movement, or whether it's actually going to be a bit more of a south-southeast movement. The models are still a little bit sketchy on that. So because it is in our area, the Bureau in Queensland are issuing an information bulletin, and they're saying the cyclone is moving south-southwest about 10 kilometres an hour, so very slowly, and should gradually intensify over the next day or so. Tropical Cyclone Freda is currently producing gale to storm force winds about the southern islands of the Solomon Islands. The system lies well off the east coast of Australia and is not expected to move significantly closer to Australia over the forecast period. And the forecast period they're talking about is the next 3 days. Okay, so this is the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre's track of this tropical cyclone, and they track it out and continue pushing it south-southwest, just edging it slightly closer to Australia, but still a very, very long way. No effect on our weather whatsoever, except for maybe some swells in a few days' time. But they then have it recurving fairly rapidly to the southeast as it encounters what we call an upper level trough. It encounters that trough, and that trough will create those northwesterly winds in the upper levels that will try to push this system this way. Now, the interesting thing at that time is also that at the surface we're going to have easterly winds, and I'll go through the synoptic pattern there, and this is why the system is expected to get into a fairly high wind shear environment and weaken as it approaches New Caledonia. The one thing I would like to note though, people, is that even with the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre and the Bureau of Meteorology showing this track, based on model guidance, there is a very low confidence in the track forecast because different models are doing different things, and some models are doing very silly things with it, like pushing it directly southwest. Other models are pushing it directly southeast. There's things that they're doing that don't make sense, and so therefore the confidence in the track forecast, especially after about 3 days' time, once it gets to this region, the confidence in the forecast post that is very, very low, because there's all sorts of crazy things happening depending on whichever model you decide to look at. The other key thing to note is that the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre is suggesting that once this system clears the Solomons, as in gets into this region here in a very low wind shear environment, it could bomb out, so it could really intensify rapidly into Category 3, possibly high-end Category 3 type tropical system in this region. So something to watch over the next day to 2 days in this system. The latest satellite that we've got, a couple of hours old, clearly see the centre of this tropical cyclone, right in there where my cursor is. Much better defined, isn't it, than Tropical Cyclone Mitchell, so you can really tell the fact that this one is a Category 2, possibly even at the higher end of a Category 2, compared to Mitchell, which is at a low end of a Category 1. So really clear and obvious sign there of this one being a lot stronger. When we combine that satellite image with the OSCAT pass, we can see that we've got winds of 40 to 50 knots, these yellow winds here of 40 to 50 knots coming right around the system here. We also, once again, just like Mitchell, we see that because it's not really attached to any type of monsoonal surge, we don't have much in the way of winds to its northwest, and so you've got here winds of maybe possibly strong wind warning, maybe just less, and we've got winds here that aren't quite tropical cyclone, aren't quite gale force to its northwest. So it's got a very, very skinny wind field to its northwest, but huge radius of gales out here to the east, and even storm force winds out here to the east of the system. So we've got a very, very large wind field out to the east, a very small wind field out to the west. Very moist environment, no chance of dry air entrainment in this system. You can see all the moisture here in this really dark browny orangey colouring, and even where it's heading, all this direction, all the way through here is going to be very moist environment, suitable for continual thunderstorm formation, and the system shouldn't weaken at all due to dry. If we look at wind shear right now, it's in a almost perfect environment. Well, not quite perfect. Just to the north is perfect environment. If that upper anticyclone pushes a little bit south of it, a little bit south to lie over the top of this system, it would be perfect. But look, it's in a very nice area, 10 to 20 knots of wind shear. If it continues to push in a southwest direction, we'll continue to see just 10 to 20 knots of wind shear. The reason, and I will go through this in a little bit more detail, but the reason it won't push to the west towards the Queensland coast, it'll just get sheared away. Look at this, 40, 50, 60 knots of shear as it pushes closer to the Queensland coast. It won't survive that. And so if it continues to track in its current track, which is towards the southwest, it should survive and should be in a very nice little area for development over the next 24 to 48 hours. After that, as we start to head towards New Caledonia, you can see it'll start to track into an increasingly sheared environment, and remembering that there's an upper level trough which will even increase these numbers further as it heads towards the east, and so you're looking at the system having to withstand 30, possibly 40 knots of wind shear as it approaches New Caledonia, and that's why both the Bureau in the extended and the JTWC and the models are suggesting that this system will weaken as it gets to New Caledonia, as it approaches New Caledonia. If we look at some of the guidance, New Caledonia looks like it's right in the firing line there. The CMC model and the GFS model fire it straight into the island. The NOGAPS model has it moving well to the west, straight into an upper level trough, which really doesn't make sense. It defies explanation why they would be doing that. And so we're completely discounting that scenario. The UK Met, for some reason, decides that it's going to push a little bit further to the west and then just go east, which also makes absolutely zero sense either. So at the moment, the models are not doing a very good job whatsoever with this system. The most realistic scenario, based on the models that we've got and based on our knowledge of what tends to happen with the different systems that actually steer these, is that it should push towards the south-southwest or southwest, then the south, and then the southeast, somewhere in between these huge outliers out here. So probably in this region is where we would be expecting the system to go, slightly west of New Caledonia, but don't be surprised if towards the southern part of that island it does start to push a little bit more towards the east as an upper level trough really starts to hammer it with upper level westerly winds. Okay, there's been a lot of talk about the Coral Sea being a bit cooler than average in terms of its sea surface temperatures. That may or may not be true, different parts of the Coral Sea, but I'll tell you what, there is enough heat in that ocean to sustain a tropical cyclone all the way south to Brisbane latitudes. So there is absolutely no problems with the ocean sea surface temperatures of the Coral Sea if a cyclone is to head this way. This one isn't, but if it was to head this way, there would be absolutely no issue with sea surface temperatures all the way south to around about Brisbane and eastwards into the Coral Sea and Southwest Pacific. So we have sea surface temperatures that will support tropical cyclone development well south of 20 degrees south. They're not as hot as the Western Australian region, yes, absolutely, but they're certainly hot enough. So even though there is a lot of talk happening at the moment about how cool the Coral Sea is, it's not really true. The Coral Sea is well and truly able to sustain a tropical cyclone all the way south, as I say, to close to the Brisbane latitudes. Okay folks, the last thing I'd like to talk about tonight before our prize draw is just this hint of a tropical low developing to the west of or northwest of the Territory, north of the Kimberley. This is on Friday next week. We've got just a little bit of a northwest flow, maybe even a lightish surge coming this way, and we've got a little bit of an eddy in what looks to be a bit of a monsoon trough there. And then if we continue to track this system over the next sort of 24 hours, and by Saturday night we actually see a fair rotation in this area to the north of, or the northwest of, the territory. So we've seen sort of 20 knot northeasterly winds, and we see 20 knot northwesterly winds. Not much coming in from the western quadrant, but we certainly see the start of what looks to be a new tropical low near East Timor, in the Timor Sea here, to the northwest of Darwin. Now, this is still a long way away, but I'll show you some of the ensemble modelling that shows the same type of thing. So this is by that time, Saturday morning next week, we just start to see the hint of some lower type pressures up here in the Timor Sea. We're also, interestingly, still watching this huge model divergence as to what Tropical Cyclone Freda will do in the long term. Next Saturday, the model's all over the place as to where it is, what it's doing. But I already showed you that after the 3-day period, in fact, even in the next 3 days, the models are all over the place. So really, we can't look ahead at Freda with any confidence whatsoever. So I know it's going to show, this model's going to show you a scenario where it pushes back onto the Queensland coast, but please don't pay much attention to that, because at this stage the models just have absolutely no idea what to do with Freda whatsoever. So let's just focus on the next 3 days with Freda, knowing that it won't come anywhere near Queensland, and then should start to swing away towards New Caledonia. After that, anyone's guess. What we are focused on is this new potential development up here. On the 5th of January, now the model, this European model has been very stubborn, and it's always suggested a tropical low forming around about the 7th of January and pushing towards the west and then towards the south. Now on the 5th of January, we're just starting to see that localised area of lower pressure there, and we just see a general area of slightly lower pressures throughout the Timor Sea and the Southeast Indian Ocean in this region. Once again, don't pay too much attention to what's going on out here. By the Sunday, we're starting to see this entire area starting to show potential from the model of some sort of rotational development, some sort of tropical low development, all the way through from the Tiwi Islands, all the way to East Timor, and even encroaching on the North Kimberley coastline. So that entire region needs to be watched as we head in towards next weekend. Then after that, on the Monday, the models are very divergent as to whether to smack that low straight back into Darwin, whether to push it to the west and continue to form it out here. It just becomes that variable that we no longer have any confidence in any of the forecast modelling after that date. So at least we know that by next weekend, or on next weekend, we're probably going to be starting to see the start of a new low pressure system out here. And what it does, whether it forms into a cyclone, whether it pushes southwards, we just don't know yet. The model's not clear enough on it. Okay folks, time has come to find out who our winner is of our prize. So we have 200 people. Each of those people have 3 slots, 3 potential winning slots. So we have a minimum of 1, a maximum of 600. This is a random number generator. So as soon as I hit generate, it'll give me a result. I'll then match it up to our Excel database, which I can't show you online for privacy reasons. But I'll match it, and then we'll find out who our winner is. Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, click. And number 416 is Natalie Oakes from South Headland in Western Australia. So if you know Natalie Oakes, let her know. We'll be telling her on Facebook, but let her know please. Natalie Oakes from South Headland in Western Australia. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked our update tonight, please click on an ad. That helps support us, helps us to pay for our chasers. The prize tonight was a $50 gift voucher from my business, Elite Sports and Supplements, and my business will be sponsoring these prizes for online polls throughout the Christmas and cyclone season 2012-2013. And the other prize that was also on offer was a free download of our Oz Cyclone Chasers Tropical Cyclone Lure documentary. And that was an hour-and-a-half long little production piece that we did from a tropical cyclone chase last March that we have on sale. and that's on our website at www.ozcyclonechasers.com or www.ozcyclone, as in OZ, cyclonechasers.com.au. Both sites will take you to this one site here. Congratulations to Natalie Oakes, and thanks everyone for watching. Good night.